Welcome, guys, to the DPS Basics course by Ren and I. My name's Akinetic. A lot of people call me Chris. That's fine. I am the GM of Adra, and Ren is one of the mods on my team. Ren, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, I am Ren, also known as Lady Ren Game.
Awesome. Our hope today was just to go over some basic stuff for how to DPS, like sets, a few other things, and just kind of like talk things through. And if you guys have any questions while we're going through everything, feel free to go ahead and ask. I have the stream up, so if you're on Twitch right now, if you put a question in the chat, I'll be able to answer it. I think Ren is kind of watching as well, so if I miss it, she'll probably catch it for me. But yeah, feel free to stop us and ask some questions as we go through. You can save them for the end, whatever is preferable for you. So like I said, we'll be talking about some armor sets, armor, gear, passives, mundus, some champion points, consumables, scribing, and a few other things as well, right? So why don't we go ahead and jump right in real quick. Oh, and we are recording, so this will be available later. And I think one or two people joined since I said this, but the PowerPoint itself will also be available. We kind of want to make all this stuff like easily accessible for you guys to come back and reference later. All right. So jumping straight into armor, you normally run 6 medium and 1 light. There are a few benefits to that, right? So medium armor passives give crit damage, weapon and spell damage, stamina ability cost reduction, and stamina recovery. And those are some pretty strong passives, right? We think about why we run medium armor. It's to help us reach the crit damage cap, and that's something we'll kind of address a little bit later. And that's because we don't usually need the light armor passives in this scenario, right? So light armor usually provides, or does provide, crit chance, penetration, and mag recovery. Crit chance is fine. It's good up to a certain point. After you get to a certain point, there's kind of a diminishing return on critical chance. So above like 60, 70%, you don't really need much more of it. And a lot of people sit around that naturally. And then you have penetration, right? Which is actually the most important like stat in the game. You need your penetration to be at 18, was it 18,200? Or close to that, right? That's where you get the most damage from. But we don't usually need that because in raid we have things like Alkosh, Crusher, Major, Minor, and I'm forgetting the term you run. Is it Major, Minor, Breach? And then so it kind of gets you to that debuff cap on penetration that you need. And so you don't need as much light armor, right? So you go 6 medium to get the benefit from the crit damage and weapon and spell damage, and that's where you kind of want to sit with 1 light, and that 1 light kind of puts you closer to the penetration cap. All right. And so as we go through, you'll notice that there are 5 different tiers for gear, and you're kind of upgrading that gear as you increase the power or upgrade your gear. It kind of increases the power of the gear itself, right? And you'll notice that changes the enchantment, it changes the trait on it, right? And it also changed the buffs that the actual sets give, right? So some gear does get buffed by what like how much you've upgraded it. So it's important to try to like gold out your gear eventually. And it can provide a pretty decent damage increase. It's not anything crazy, but it's a few percentage points, right? And then I think the most important thing to improve first is always going to be your weapons. You want those gold as soon as you possibly can. They affect your light attacks, they affect your skills, and you want Nern honed on your main hand in your dagger slot because it increases the damage of the weapon by 30%, which basically increases the damage that your skills do, light attacks do, and all that stuff. So that is really big. So make sure you're golding out your weapons and then golding out your gear afterwards. All right. And so I talked about this briefly on the other page, but traits, enchantments, armor, and jewelry. So the traits improve the performance of weapons and armor. And so the vast majority of the time, I think the vast majority of the time for a weapon trait, you're running divines. There's some niche scenarios where you don't run divines, but we're probably not going to get too much into that right now. So you always run divines, and divines buffs your Mundus stone. And if I think we're going to mention this later as well, but you always run the thief for your Mundus stone, and that gives you crit chance, right? And so then we're buffing that Mundus that's giving us crit chance with our traits on our armor. So it kind of makes that Mundus a little bit more impactful. Enchants are added to items through glyphs, which can alter or enhance the item's effect. On gear, typically you're running your max stat. On your jewelry, you're running weapon damage and spell damage glyphs. There are some recovery lines on the weapon damage and spell damage glyphs now. They're not super impactful, but if you want an extra 50 recovery of your main stat or your off stat, that's something that you can do. And the weapon chance, they have a chance to enchantments have to have a charge that they decrease as they're used, so they have to be recharged. But the weapon enchants themselves also provide things like fiery weapon, shock, other things like that. Typically, DPS will run fiery, and poison, and they provide the burning status effect and the poison status effect, which are pretty strong single target dots that you want. And you apply those by light attacking and keeping up your weapon damage skills, right? So that's like deadly cloak, I guess anything in the like dual wield passive line if that's what you're using, or if you're in the like the staff or any other thing, right? Making sure you're using those weapon abilities and the skills that come with those abilities. Um, and so, stamina DPS, stamina enchants, divine traits, magicka, magic enchants, divine traits, and then you want bloodthirsty on your jewelry, right? So this is the most commonly used one. Again, there maybe are some niche scenarios we might not use bloodthirsty, but it's not super common anymore, and so we probably always put bloodthirsty on our jewelry. All right. And so the most common front bar that you'll see on basically every class run, again, it's some other niche scenarios we don't run dual wield, but on your front bar you typically run dual wield. It has a passive. I forget the name of the passive off the top of my head, but it gives you crit bonus, right? Crit chance, which is huge. We still want to get some crit chance if we can. And there's some other pretty good dual wield passives in there as well. And so we want Nerd Hunt on our main hand, and the offhand is usually charged or precise. You want charge in single target scenarios, and you kind of want precise if you're doing any cleave. And this might look like Reef Guardian, or maybe if you're on Oaks, or situations where you're hitting more than one target. Precise comes out a little bit better than charge in those scenarios. All right, and so then you have staves. Inferno Staff on the back bar. This is pretty standard. Inferno Staffs buff single target damage while you're on your back bar, so it's not huge for your front bar, but that's there. And then you have Flame Wall on your back bar, and it benefits from the Destruction Staff passives. And you run the Infuse trait with a weapon damage enchant to proc Wall of Elements, or it's I guess to proc your your enchant on your back bar. And so you run Infuse because it buffs your weapon damage enchant on your back bar. And then you run Wall of Elements because it'll continuously proc, even if you're on your front bar, your back bar trait. And so you'll kind of have this infused weapon damage glyph giving you, I think it's 452 weapon and spell damage continuously that can be buffed by other things in raid. So like major brutality, minor brutality will buff that. And so you're kind of getting close to about 600 weapon and spell damage from having an infused weapon damage enchant on your, I guess, infused trait and weapon damage enchant on your back bar. And then we have bow. Typically, there are some classes that run like bow on their front bar as well. Bow is a pretty strong weapon to use, although it's not always needed in some scenarios, right? So like we said, usually placed in the back bar, though sometimes used on both. It's got strong dots like poison injection, and endless hail is a pretty strong skill as well. It kind of operates very similarly to Wall of Elements in that you use it to proc your enchant, and then you also run infused to boost that enchant on the back bar. All right, so we're going to jump into some sets here. I kept it pretty high level for the most part, so we're not going to go into like a lot of niche sets that you might find. If you have any questions about specific classes or anything like that, you can definitely ask. But I kind of wanted sets that were going to be good for basically everybody to get. So here's Soul's End's Torment. That's from Rock Grove. This set provides a 30-second buff that raises your crit damage and crit chance. Very strong in trash. It's a great set to use. Arcanists don't typically need this set, but you can use it in trash packs before bosses to buff the beginning of your parse on the boss. Azure Blight is the strongest set in the game for situations where there's 3 targets. So in trash, obviously, there's a ton of targets. This is a really strong set. Everybody should farm Azure Blight. Core Riptide is really good for stamina gamers in trash, specifically Arcanists. Some other classes can take advantage of some other sets. But as an Arcanist, running Azure Blight and Coral is very strong. It'll help you do a lot of damage in trash, right? And then we have Ansel's Torment. Some classes can run Ansel's in trash. It's fairly strong. If you're an Arcanist, you have trouble keeping your Coral down. If you're like towards the beginning of your raid career, Ansel's a pretty good set to start out with. until you can kind of manage your stam a little bit better. Although I'd recommend starting out trying to manage your stam. But there's definitely some value there. Ansel's, this is obviously we're talking about trash here, but Ansel's has some other applications as well where you get interrupts and stuff like that, because the set does buff your damage by, I think it's 7% if you've not interrupted something, and then 15% if you have. And then we have Mechanical Acuity. It's a crafted set. It's really good for burst encounters. So some trash packs where you just want to burst them down really quickly, you would run Mechanical Acuity on your front bar. And every time you do non-critical damage, it adds a stack. The stack gives you 20% crit chance. Once you reach max stats, it goes away. And so you try to prolong that, right? And so you put it on your front bar so you're not proccing it while you're running in and placing some of those dots. But overall, a very strong set to have. Although you don't want to use Mechanical Acuity in trash packs where you're going to be stuck in combat for longer than maybe 8 seconds. You want to keep that like for those short duration burst trash packs, right? So there are a lot of trash packs in the game that kind of prolong. If you can't get out of combat, Mechanical Acuity will actually be worse overall if you have to keep it on and you're not able to proc it consistently, right? And there is a 25-second cooldown after it's been procced. So, you put it on for a trash pack, you take it off, and then you put it on for a trash pack after that, if needed. And that's a little bit more technical than we were like kind of hoping to get into, but since it's crafted, I wanted to mention it. All right, so bosses. So I put Soulzan on here because it has been in the past used in some boss fights. It's not typically used now. There are some cases where maybe like DKs or another class could probably use Soulzan pretty effectively, but there are probably better options now. So it's not super, I guess, a super meta set for boss fights right now. I talked about Core Riptide. There's some information about it above. Very strong set. You get max value from it at 33%. It gives you, I think, 800 weapon and spell damage that can be buffed, or maybe it's 600, I forget. But very strong set. And you don't have to have your stamina at 0, just at like around 33% to get basically the max buff from this, right? So very strong. Very good for single target or cleave, right? Because it's just flat weapon and spell damage. So you'll do more cleave damage, you'll do more single target damage, just very strong in general. Like I mentioned before, Azure Blight, huge. Best set in the game for 3 or more enemies. Big on Reef Guardian, big on Boss A. It has some applications in certain places, but yeah, very strong set when there's multiple targets, right? Rune Carver's Blaze. This is from Scrivener's Hall. It does flame damage every 3rd tick of a damage over time ability. It's pretty strong in single target encounters on Arcanist and DK. I'm sure other classes can use it as well. Arcanist seems to get a lot of value out of it because there's a lot of dot damage going out, and the same thing can be said for Dragon Knight. DKs and single target encounters where they don't need a ton of cleave will typically run Runecarver's Blaze and Rally or another setup. So it is a pretty meta setup right now, early set, I guess. So we have Corpse Burster, Infinite Archive, very strong. It's a Necromancer specific set that does damage over time for each corpse that's consumed. It also buffs damage done for each Gravelord skill slotted. Very strong for Necromancer. You can go farm that if you want to. All the top like Necroparsers are using Corpse Burster right now. Deadly Strikes, strong on Templar and Arcanist. It buffs your channeled abilities by 20%. That buffs basically the beam abilities, right? And Languid and stuff like that. So very strong set. Probably equally as good for Arcanist and single target encounters as Runecarver's Blaze might be. I mentioned Ansel's already. 7% flank damage buff unless you interrupt something. Pretty good in Navi Portal. Might be some other applications for it I'm not thinking of, but not a bad set to farm. Arms of Reliquant is probably, and it can't be used by Arcanist, but Arms of Reliquant is probably the strongest single target set in the game. You apply a stack of harmful winds every time you light attack an enemy. It does damage over time for 5 seconds. The max that a target can have is 5 stacks. Not as good on Arcanist, right? So you don't run that because you're not light attacking as much on Arcanist, but very strong set. And the Whirl of Depths definitely deserves a mention here. So it's a proc set that does single target damage to start out, and then after about 10 seconds, it does AoE damage for about 8 seconds, and then has a cooldown. Pretty strong set, does a good amount of damage, can be used on basically any class. All right, and support sets, not too much here. Elemental Catalyst buffs crit damage. Zendry Dust buffs damage over time, or not damage over time, sorry, just flat damage. But it's applied when you have a damage over time ability, and then you light attacks on an enemy, and then you light attack them. Alkosh, you'll see it in every comp right now, every support support DK or Necromancer probably is running Alkosh. It debuffs an enemy, it debuffs an enemy and gives you guys penetration. Huge. Master Architect War Machine. It just basically gives you Major Slayer, which is a really strong buff. It's like 10, it's like 1 second every 10 ultimate you spent, so huge. It's used in burst encounters. Martial Knowledge. When your stamina is below 50%, your light attacks cause an enemy to take 8% increased damage for 5 seconds. Very strong set. So these are just kind of support sets that you run, and something to think about as you go through your like DPS career that you might want to pick up, right? All right. And Ren, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, sorry, I was responding to a question. Open your stream back up. Okay, hello everybody. We're going to talk about passives and munduses, or mundus stones. This is something, in my opinion, and for like the newer player to ESO, that is very overlooked because you're focusing your skill points on your weapon skills and all those things, and passives get overlooked and they make a massive, in my opinion, part of your damage. So the first group would be Undaunted passives. The Undaunted Metal gives you more max stats, which then equals more damage, as well as Undaunted Command. You get more value from your synergies because that is restoring your resources. And then the Fighter Skill Tree. I just listed 4 of them. It's good to have all of them. Slayer, it increases the weapon and spell damage per slotted fighter skilled ability. So you'll notice on a lot of builds, like Dawnbreaker is used on the front bar, and people say you don't want to use it. It's just used to create a damage bonus. And then that works in tail with normally like Barb Trap. So then, as you can see in the little screenshot, you're getting like a 6% bonus, and that number goes up per fighter skill ability you have slotted on your bar. Next is Banish the Wicked. You gain ultimate per kill, which is great. You always want to be gaining your ultimates. Skilled Tracker is an increase of damage, and then Intimidating Presence has a little bonus in there. Most people just use it so you can unlock that intimidating NPC option in combo, but it also reduces the stamina cost of those fighter skilled abilities. If you want to move to the next one. And then these are just little extra passives that are really important. You want to make sure that you're maxing out all your class passives, regardless of if you use that tree. I suggest just max it all out, and same for your racial passives. So you're getting the benefit of whatever race tune that you're playing, as well as your armor and your weapon passives, which Kinetic had already talked about previously. Other thing I've noticed that gets overlooked are provisioning passives in the crafting tree, the gourmand and connoisseur. When you max those out to 3, you get an extra 20-minute duration per whether it's a drink or like the food that you consume. And same for alchemy, the medicinal use. It gives 30% lasting effects. So this, as Kinetic mentioned, you get like think of things like 30% longer on your Binoherism. So you're just getting all the ulti regen. Next slide, please. All right, and lastly here is the Mundus Stone. These are stones that you can see spread out all through Tamriel. I'm sure you know, but if you don't, that's what they're for. They're also commonly found in guild halls. That's a great reason to join a guild. A lot of people do that to have easy access to the Mundus Stones. So you're not running around the map. A Mundus Stone buff remains on your character until you switch to another. So it's kind of a forget about it once you get it. And then to see if you have one, because sometimes they do fall off, you can find it under the active buffs section in your character stats. And then Kinetic talked about this a little bit earlier, but the Thief Mundus is usually what is best for a DPS player. And now onto champion points.
All right. And you want this or you want me to take this?
You can take this. You wrote this one. Unless you need a talking break, that's fine.
No, I can definitely do it. So obviously champion points, there are 3 trees. After you reach level 50, you start getting champion points, and that goes up to 3,600 points. Once you reach the, I think it's like 1200 mark, you could have 4 uh, slottable CPs in each tree. And so that's a big milestone for a lot of people that kind of like helps you get a little more damage. And I think you can have them like you can have some like a few interchangeables around 2000. You get like I think it's like 3 or 4 interchangeables around 2000. That kind of lets you swap between CP as needed. But that 1200 mark is pretty big, right? So first we have the red tree. It's all the way on the right. It can be kind of fight dependent. Typically, like a standard setup might be like Fortified Rejuvenation, Boundless Vitality, and Celerity slash a flex spot. I like Celerities in places like in trash and stuff like that, so you're moving a little bit quicker with the group. There are some other really valuable CP in here though. So Slippery gives you a free break free. That break free does take about 0.5 seconds, but that's some stamina that you're saving. And in a lot of scenarios, like I think specifically of Teleria, when you're getting hit by matrons and they are charming you into the middle of the water, if you have Slippery, it'll automatically break your free after about 0.5 seconds. And that's some stamina you didn't have to spend, right? Because that's a pretty stamina intensive fight, right? So it's a big CP. You like to have it on there. The same thing can be said about Expert Evasion. That just makes it so your next dodge roll is free. Oh, and sorry, Slippery and Expert Evasion have a 30-second cooldown, so it can only be used once every 30 seconds. But Expert Evasion makes it so you just get a free dodge roll. And this is a pretty big CP. You can use it on a lot of fights where you might need a dodge roll. I mean, I think I didn't put specific fights here, but there's a lot of application for this. Again, can be used on Teleria. You could probably use it on like Reef Guardian. You could probably use it on Oaks, on Bosse, on Zelvaka. So it can be used in a lot of places. So it's just something to keep in mind as like a way for you to get a dodge roll in without having to spend stamina. We have Siphoning Spells. This is typically just used on Bosse Portal. I put Trash here. I don't know how many people really run in Trash. You used to for Sustain. I don't know that you really need to anymore. But Bosse Portal, so when you're down on the portal and you're hitting ghosts, right, you can use Siphoning Spells to get a lot of your magic back really quickly. And that's only on hard mode. But it has some application there. We have Bastion. Bastion buffs the damage that you do to shielded enemies and buffs the size of your shields. So as a DPS, you don't really care about the size of your shields as much, but you do care about your damage to shielded enemies. This is like pretty typically only used on Zelvaka, but it makes it so you do about 15% more damage to her shell phase like clones, and so that can be pretty big to help get rid of those faster to get back to DPSing the boss, right? Bloody Renewal, again, not that useful. It's kind of the stamina version of Siphoning Spells. And then you have Refreshing Stride, which is really not that useful, but it gives you Magicka back as you are running. And so some places you can probably use this in Trash if you want to get some Magicka back if you need, but not typically as used. I just wanted to mention it because, you know, there's a lot of value in that red tree. All right, so the blue tree. This is where all your damage is. It can be pretty class dependent. We didn't get too much into the classes specifically. I do talk about Arc, but not the rest of the classes. If you have specific questions about what CP you should run in each class, you can definitely ask me. We also link Skinny Cheeks' website where he talks about which CP you could use on each class. But it can change. It can be fight dependent and stuff like that. So I didn't want to get too much into detail here. I feel like we could spend actually a lot of time here. So like I said, class dependent largely, and a large source of damage for you. Exploiter is very commonly used, and that buffs your damage by 10% when there's off balance on an enemy. As long as you have off balance, this is a very strong CP, and basically everybody's running this. In some groups, if you go into like a pug group and like a group finder or a less organized farm run, you might not have great Exploiter uptime, so you might not get as much value out of the CP, but something to definitely keep in mind. And if you do some more organized runs, like here in FTC or in Adra, we'll definitely have Exploiter for the most part, so definitely there's some value in running the CP. If you're not an Arcanist, Templar, Nightblade, then you need to run Fighting Finesse. It's an 8% just flat crit damage boost. Arcanist, or sorry, DK, and I believe, I think it's mainly DK just needs this buff. I mean, Sork as well. But I think as far as Parse classes go, like, you know, they don't reach crit damage caps, so you need Fighting Finesse. And then the last two CPs, or whatever, if you don't end up using Exploiter, the other CPs are kind of like based on what your top damaging abilities are, right? So like an Arcanist, and like I mentioned below, Biting Aura and Thaumaturge, right? Beam is your top damage ability. It's an AoE ability that does damage over time, so you take the Biting Aura CP and the Thaumaturge CP to buff that beam, right? And so you're kind of thinking about how you're doing your damage. On a Nightblade, you might be running something like Deadly Aim because you're doing a lot of single target damage. On a DK, you're probably running something like Master of Arms because you're doing a lot of direct damage. But like I said, if you have any questions or you want to look at Skinny Cheek's website, you definitely can to figure out what you want to run in your class. CP is a large source of damage, so this is something you want to make sure that you're kind of optimizing a little bit, and you'll find yourself doing a little more damage than you were doing before if you forgot what CP you need. All right, Green Tree. This is kind of personal preference and playstyle. I like liquid efficiency. I guess anything here you don't really have to have. It's not going to make or break for unit trial, but liquid efficiency is nice. It's like 10% of the time you don't consume a potion when you use it. Saves me some money on my ulti pots. It can save you guys some money on potions as well. Rationeer buffs the duration of your food. Steed's Blessing buffs your movement speed out of combat. So from trash pack to trash pack, very nice. Maybe you should probably always have this slotted. And then Treasure Hunter is nice. I don't know, if you open some chests, you're trying to get some loot, you might get a double drop from, a trial or something like that, right? From a trial chest, right? So definitely important to, maybe I say important, but maybe not that important, but like definitely good to have, right? And then the one that I do think you need to have slotted is probably Breakfall. This isn't a slottable, sorry, so you're just putting points into it, but it reduces the damage you take from falling by 75% at its max level. And so like places like Cloud Rest and Lucent Citadel where you do fall occasionally, this can save your life. So definitely good to have slotted. Also, for like me and you run off the cliff, run off cliffs in open world, not that bad, right? So, all right, consumables. And Ren, do you want to jump in here?
Sure. Okay, next is consumables, which is food and potions. What food you run in content is very important because ESO bases your damage off of your highest offensive stat. So having a really big stamina pool or magical pool is going to equal more damage. And we've listed some examples of that. So like a bi-stat food is what's commonly used in group content. That's something that has a max health and a max resource. Then no recovery, like braised rabbit with spring vegetables. There are certain occasions, or maybe you find yourself really struggling with recovery, but you still want to get that little, bump to your resource pool. You can use stuff like Arteum takeaway broth and the what's it called? The dubious food. And then there are tri-stat foods like the bewitched sugar skulls, which have max of all your stats. If you really don't feel comfortable um, running the no recovery food, those are options as well. Another type of food that we'll talk about a little bit later, but I wanted to mention here is parse food. So that's food that you wear specifically for parsing. You don't need health during that. So this is the kind of food that is just maxing either your full resource, so like a green food that is like all stamina or all magicka, or another type of food that is a max resource plus recovery. So like lava foot soup is a really popular one for stamina users, and then ghastly eyeball is popular for magicka. Next slide, please. And then next is potions. I just listed some examples. I didn't want to add in all the ingredients because there are plenty of resources out there on how to craft these. One of the most commonly used one for like group content like trials is the Essence of Health that gives you all your resources back. This one's so popular just because bi-stat food is so popular right now, and this is a way to help you with that resource regain when your food isn't giving it to you. Another popular one is like heroism pots. So like as you see, the Essence of Magicka has that little heroism benefit at the bottom. There are different ways to make this, but I just use that as an example. And then like the trash pots, which are just the Essence of Stamina, Essence of Magicka, like basic ones you can use if you aren't super rich and you don't want to do the Essence of Health. These are great as well. And then I'm not sure how commonly used these are anymore, but the Essence of Spell Power and Weapon Power potions are great options as well.
Awesome. And I'll just add in here, and maybe a less organized group, Essence of Spell Power potions might be important. If you don't have like Camel Hunter in your front bar, you're not getting Major Prophecy, And if you don't have like a decaying root providing igneous, you probably won't be getting major sorcery or major brutality. And so and major sorcery and major brutality are huge damage buffs at 20%. So if you're not getting that buff, like you notice in raid that you don't see that buff on your screen, or you look at your CMX afterwards and you don't see that, you should start running Essence of Spell Power Pots or Essence of Weapon Power Pots if you can't. All right. And so we're going to talk briefly about scribing. There's not a lot here. Banner, right? Huge damage increase. You know, what did Arcanists need, or what did we just need in general? More damage, right? Like that's definitely what we needed, was more damage. Arc Banner is pretty strong. You either run AoE, Magic, or Dot. That's really up to your raid lead and group composition. A lot of times, if you're stacking Arcanists, you just run Magic. If you have a few more non-Arcanist classes, you might do AoE or Dot damage. Just something to keep in mind. We'll talk about how you can like break that down later. And so you run, you know, AoE, Magic, or Dot, and I forget the name if it's affix script or whatever, but it's basically the first slot is AoE, Magic, or Dot. Then you do your class mastery script, which basically gives you a crux every 5 seconds. Very strong as an Arcanist. This is definitely something that you want. And then you can either run Prophecy, Berserk, or Heroism. Here it's kind of personal preference, right? So Prophecy is fine, Berserk is fine, Heroism is fine. If you run Heroism on your banner, make sure that you have Camo Hunter on your front bar. Otherwise, you're not getting major Prophecy. And then if you're running Berserk, you also need to make sure that you have Camo Hunter on your front bar, just so you're getting that major Prophecy as well. I think I don't know which one's stronger in unorganized content. I mean, Heroism seems pretty strong if you can provide yourself with Prophecy and Berserk with Camo Hunter, and you don't want to have Trap in your front bar. But it's kind of personal preference, and you won't see, you know, until you get into the like min-maxing a little bit more, you won't see a huge difference in your game performance probably, depending on which one you run. And then I also wanted to mention Necro Banner. If you play Necromancer, the banner is pretty strong. You don't run in all content, but if you're running Corpse Burster, this can be pretty strong. It buffs your stats. And you don't need to run Camo Hunter with this because you have a pet that gives you Prophecy. You could probably still maybe need the Berserk, but you get that from your banner. So I guess maybe a freezable slot for you potentially. I don't play Necro as much, but I know Necro Banner can be pretty strong in certain scenarios, so it's not something to, I guess, scoff at, right? And then another scribing skill I wanted to mention is Shocking Contingency. If you're running Elemental Catalyst, Shocking Contingency can be a very easy way to keep up shock weakness. Running Mystic Siphon is kind of a pain in the ass sometimes. And it does this thing where it procs shock damage at the source of the corpse and then in a line back to you from where your like actual corpse is, right? So it kind of tethers to you. Shocking Contingency, you don't have to do that. You can proc it on something and it will just continually proc as long as you're on the bar that has EC on it. So you don't have to worry about where your corpse is and stuff like that. So that can be pretty nice, right? All right, and so parsing, we want to talk briefly about this. I don't think we go super into detail about this either. I'm going to preface this later, but if you have any questions about parsing or like anything like that, you're welcome to come to the Adriel like log review sessions and gameplay review sessions, and we can kind of go more in depth about this. We considered breaking down some parsing content for you guys here, but I thought it might not be as valuable if it's not your class, and I didn't want to lose people's interest that way. We probably would have picked Arcanist, which is everybody, but you know, a little bit less interesting to parse an Arcanist than a lot of other classes. So parsing is extremely important for learning your class and its rotation. Obviously, a lot of people say like high parses don't equate to high in damage content, but they can, right? They can, right? Knowing your rotation really well and knowing your class passives when you need to cast a certain ability, when you don't need to cast a certain ability, can be really strong for helping you maintain like high damage. And then you add in the mechanic part when you're actually doing a fight, right? But if you don't know your rotation before you're in the fight, it's gonna be really tough for you to do a lot of damage, right? Like if you don't know what like skills you need to cast next, and then you're also trying to learn mechanics or trying to like navigate mechanics, it's gonna be really hard for you to like watch your feet, see your skills, and kind of be watching the boss and anything that's going on around you, right? So you kind of want to have the skill portion figured out early. And so I think as most good ESO players will tell you at this point, at the beginning of their career, and even now, they spend a lot of time parsing. I know when I was running the game, I was spending about 30 minutes to an hour a day parsing. So I'd kind of like when I got on the game for the first time, after I did my writs, I would just parse for a little bit and just get a little practice in. And as you're learning the game, you should definitely be doing this. And then so as far as like sets go, I put Highland here versus Deadly Coral. I probably shouldn't have put the Deadly Coral in. I was trying to avoid pushing people towards one class, right? Um, but Deadly Coral is typically ran an Arcanist. Now you run Highland and Coral on an Arcanist, but every class uses Highland on the dummy. It's just flat crit chance if you stand still, which you do on the dummy. So um, probably the strongest parse set in the game right now. Definitely something you should have, and it's crafted. And then it's also useful in some boss fights as well. So things like VKA, where you kind of just stand and parse, you can use Highland, and it's very strong there. So not a bad set to pick up. And there's some other things. So I mentioned rotation, right? And then potion timing, right? So if you're running Coral, your potion timing is pretty important. You don't want to use your potion when you're at like 40% max stat, right? Because you're just going to push your stat up to like 60 to 70%, and then you're not going to be getting as much benefit from Coral. So keeping an eye on where your stamina is, where your magicka is, and then what buffs you need, and is your potion providing a buff that you need that you have to use, and then also trying to make your rotation kind of work in a way that you're dropping your max stat enough that when your potion comes up, you just proc it. And that's typically how it goes if you're parsing correctly. Like your max stat will be low enough that you can proc a potion. But it's something to be keeping track of, I guess, as you're learning how to parse, and you might be over sustaining a little bit, right? Not casting the correct abilities at the right time. Your potion timing is important. And then I also wanted to mention off balance. There's a few ways you can track it. Hypertools, which we mentioned later, and like pen test and just stuff like that. But a lot of times when off balance is up, and this is true in boss fights, you kind of want to be using your highest damage abilities. Um, and this is usually like as I see off balance is coming up, I'm making sure all my dots are down, like I'm refreshing, I'm making sure like things are good to go. And then I'm like usually ulting, and if I'm on Arcanist, I'm beaming. And then if a dot is going to fall off during off balance window, if it's not Wall of Elements that's proccing my back bar enchant, I'm probably leaving it until after the off balance window is over, right? Because there's more value in buffing your beam and your other damage abilities during that time than there is in refreshing a dot during the off balance window. Um, that's a little bit more min maxy, right? But it's definitely something to be careful of. And some of the highest parses will definitely be taking advantage of off balance. So I just wanted to make sure you guys like had that in here as well. And then go find a video from Ryeso, Alduin, Charles, Skinny. There's a lot of good parsers out there that put their content on YouTube. And watch that video, deconstruct it, copy their cast, think about why they're casting each skill in that order. When they ult, you'll often see them ulting during off balance windows. And when do they choose to stop recasting a dot? So as you get closer to execute to the end of the parse, you don't always want to refresh things, right? Like, you're not always trying to click barb trap at 10%, right? You're going to get some more value through bloodthirst and other things from just, doing your spammable or, procking another skill. So there's definitely a lot of value in watching people parse in the class that you're trying to learn. All right, and so light attacks are crucial in ESO combat. Um, all skills have a 1 second global cooldown, and they should be like preceded by a light attack. So you kind of light attack and then cancel the animation of your light attack with a skill. And that's called light attack weaving, right? And light attacks, if you're running Velothi, don't do a ton of damage, but if you're not running Velothi, they do a decent amount of your damage, like up to 11%. And so you want to be making sure you're hitting your light attacks in between. And if you are running Velothi, they're still proccing your passive ult gen. And so every time you light attack, you get 3 ultimate a second for, I think it's 3 seconds. And so you can gen like 9 ult. And so that's pretty big, right? So a lot of times if you see in content people are doing more damage than you and you can't really understand why, you can look at their like ultimate. Are they ulting more than you are? Are they genning more ultimate than you are? Are you getting 4 languages or 4 standards or, whatever ult you're using and you're getting one less than them? A lot of times it'll come down to light attacks, right? Making sure you're hitting those on cooldown, basically after, before every skill to make sure you're proccing that passive. And then they also can trigger your weapon enchants, right? Which is pretty big. And so you can apply a weapon enchant to like the dummy or in content to a boss through light attacking. So definitely like there's a lot of value there, ultimate damage, all that stuff. So make sure you do learn how to light attack weave. There are a lot of videos out there on how to learn how to light attack weave, like how to light attack weave. So I don't think we put anything here, but just keep an eye on that, and definitely like when you're parsing and learning how to play the game, you should also try to be learning how to like light attack weave. Um, and yeah, so I guess like at a maximum, you can have like 60 light attacks per minute. No one really ever gets that. I mean, I think the max you see in content is probably around 55 to 56. I mean, maybe some people reach 60, but I think this as a starting place for you, you kind of want to make sure you're just hitting a light attack as much as possible, but at least every 3 seconds. So you're getting that ultimate. And that'll look like 20 to 30 light attacks a minute. And then you kind of want to keep going up from there, right? If you're hitting less than probably 20 light attacks a minute, you are not generating enough ult, potentially not generating enough ult. Uh, so just something like if you're looking at cast in an ESO log and you're like, wow, I only hit light attack like 20 times in this fight. If all your light attacks are focused together in one area, you generate a lot of ult at the beginning of the minute, but then the last like 30 seconds of the minute, you miss all your light attacks. There's a few ways there you could probably be losing some ultimates. So light attacks are huge. They're very important. So moving on. So in-game settings, I think Brendan and I will swap in and off on this, but there are a lot of really important in-game settings that can help you like be more aware of a fight, do more, not really do more damage, but kind of like help you in that fight so you understand mechanics better and everything like that. So something you want to do is set your field of view to max. This is in your camera settings. If you're at 100 still, you don't want to be. You want to be at 130. This lets you see so much more stuff around you and helps your in-rate awareness, helps you see mechanics, and is overall like a big gameplay improvement for people. This like is something you definitely need to make sure that you're doing. Like if you don't have it done, you should do it right now. And then after you change the FOV, making sure you're zooming all the way out. So if you have it bound to scroll wheel or whatever you have it bound to, making sure that you're like zooming all the way out on your FOV. View distance increased from 50 to 70. It lets you see things further out. And then you have vertical offset set to max, and this basically takes you off the ground. So if you're parsing and looking at stuff, right, your camera is kind of centered around your character at its feet, almost not really centered, but like closer to. The vertical offset will take you off the ground a little bit and put you in the air, and again lets you see like a little bit more of your screen. I don't like screen shake. I turn that off. If you like screen shake, I might be judging you slightly. I'm not sure. And then turn off bloom. The abilities in this game are bright enough as is. You don't need extra like light on your screen. And then these are kind of personal preference, but I like them. So you can enemy NPCs show set to always, so it puts nameplates on them. Any enemy NPCs highlight set to always show nameplates again. It kind of highlights them, like all that stuff. It's they're easier to see. I think it's a helpful tip to have on. This is something I was thinking about adding in here that I didn't know if we should, but it's active combat tips. So the majority of the time, these aren't super useful, but occasionally if you're learning a fight or if you're new to the game, you can turn on active combat tips and it'll tell you when you need to break free. It'll tell you if you need to block or dodge roll. It kind of gives you those tips from the bosses, like mechanics or, mechanics and trash and stuff like that. So it can be useful if you don't know a fighter you're learning, right? And then this is big. You don't want to be double casting your ground abilities. So if you turn on quick cast for ground abilities, it'll make it so it's a single cast. It's much faster. And hopefully everybody has this turned on after this. And then I think for a lot of people, turning your damage numbers on is really important because you can see what you're actually doing damage to, which is super important, right? Especially if you're using things like beam and other damage abilities. Like if you're placing your wall, is it hitting all the targets that you want it to hit? Well, you can tell really easily if you turn your damage numbers on, right? Are you beaming the correct target? Really easy to see when you can see whether or not you're doing damage to it, right? And so this is super useful for every class. But yeah, so definitely something to have on. And then we have some Arcanist specific. I don't like aim assist on Arcanist. It can kind of turn your beam to other areas and make it so you're not cleaving certain targets. But sometimes it can definitely help too. I think ultimately the best way to go about this is to make sure that you are setting this to 0 and then beaming through every single target, right? You don't want something else aiming for you, especially if there's multiple targets. If your raid lead says to focus something and then you're beaming through a target and your beam is getting auto assisted somewhere else, it's just not super helpful. I think it's better if you just aim yourself. So you kind of want to set, I think you want to set that to 0. So here are the field of view settings themselves if you don't know where they are. I put this in here. So it's in the camera settings, and you want this box right here set to 130. Like I mentioned, increases in content situational awareness. And I threw this in here just in case people needed to see it. We can see if we can increase the quality here. But it's basically just going to walk you through how to change your field of view. I imagine a scenario where there's a lot of new players that don't really know all these settings are and stuff like that. So, you know, from the beginning of the video to now, you can see like, you see how zoomed in I am here. And then we go to the end here when I'm zoomed out, like how much more I can see because I've put this setting on. So definitely something to keep track of and use, right? All right, and then how do I just move past this slide? Okay. So enemy area effect color, and I know it went out of full screen. I don't know how to get it back. That's fine. I'm not really like stressed about it. So enemy area effect color, this is another big thing. If you have the base color, it can sometimes be hard to distinguish from like the ground. And so you want to set this to an easily visible color. And this can be done in your gameplay settings, right? And so I like to pick pink. You can pick yellow or white, whatever is going to be easily visible for you. But it makes it so you can see those ground AoEs a lot better, so you know when you're taking ground AoE damage. And this is what it looks like, right? So these AoEs normally would be like green or like red, and very similar to the color of the outside of the arena or to the like floor, and a little bit harder to distinguish. And so setting this on makes it a lot easier to see these AoEs. Obviously makes it a lot easier to see curses, right? If you're on boss A and you're always bombing, you can't see the curses, right? You know, field of view, change your enemy AoE color, and then maybe add one or two add-ons that we're going to mention later, and you should be in good shape. All right. And I'm sorry, Ren, I kind of went through that whole thing, but do you want to jump
Oh,
in here on
you're okay.
add-ons?
Yeah, I'll jump in for add-ons. So first off, I want to start with a little disclaimer. So there are so many add-ons in ESO. Going forward, we've just listed like the basics. They might not be everybody's favorite. Um, use what you prefer, but these are just some of the basics that we think would be really helpful for DPS and raiders starting out. So if you don't have Minion, here's a little quick setup information with a link of where to install it and then where to install that download on your computer. Minion is a third-party app that manages add-ons for ESO. Next slide, please. And here is a list of like general quality of life add-ons that are super helpful. First and foremost is Pithka's achievement tracker. When you join like a rating Discord and they ask for you to post your clears, it's coming from Pithka's. It tracks all of your trial clears, dungeon clears, etc. It's great for just a good overview. And there's also, if you click on the dungeon or the trial, it gives you a little teleport option. So that's helpful if you need like quick ports somewhere. Another great add-on is Inventory Insight. It lets you see all the inventory across all of your tunes in one spot. So if you're trying to quick swap something like gear, you're starting a raid, you don't know what tune it's on, this is a great one to try and find something. Auto category. I'm not as familiar with this one. Do you know what this one does, Kinetic? I think you
Yeah,
added
yeah.
that
So
one in
yeah, I
there.
did auto. So I like this one. I don't use it all the time, but it will categorize your sets and other things together for you. So if you're looking for like Azure Blight or a certain set, it'll put it all in one area for you. I think that can be nice if you're trying to find stuff. I think it's quality of life. It's not necessarily 100% needed.
I don't have that one. That sounds helpful. I have to get that. Um, Next add-on, and thank you. The next add-on on the list is currently equipped. This puts a little box of text on your screen that shows what gear you're currently wearing. Um, which is really helpful. You can have it like turn on during combat or just stay on the whole time. So if we're gonna get to a little bit later, but if you're using something like Wizard's Wardrobe and you're quick swapping your gear, it's just an easy like quick visual to make sure everything's swapped correctly instead of having to open your inventory, hover over and see what is swapped. Another great situational add-on is Hide Group or Hide Group Necro. Um, you can reference the like AoE gameplay screenshots in the game settings where you can kind of see like there's little icons above people, but you don't actually see the group. That is hide group necro. It makes it makes people in your group invisible. You can keep their nameplates on if you want to see who's who, or you can turn those off. You also have the option to just put like health bars over them if you prefer, or you can turn them off completely if you just want to solely focus on your own tune. That add-on is great for fights like Boss A when there's so much going on and there's so many AoEs and things floating around on the ground that you can just focus on what you're doing and not have all the noise or as much noise rather. Another great add-on is Lilith's Group Manager. This one is used for like the auto invites that pretty much everybody uses, like for grouping. And then it also has a death recap option in there, which is great, just for kind of on the fly, seeing as a raid lead, like seeing who died to what, or for yourself as well. One that is great for that is that we didn't mention is I think it's called Improved Death Recap that gives you a little pop-up on your screen with more information explaining how you died. Display leads. If you're trying to hunt for specific gear pieces, you can use display leads and it lists everything in its own little box, where to find it, what the lead's called, and where to get it. Hodors, this is for ultimate sharing and DPS sharing that we're going to explain later. Same with wizards. Wizard is great for grouping all of your gear sets per trial together. We're going to get more into that in a minute. And then same with OD support icons. This puts a role marker over like the tanks, healers, and DPS in your group so you can see who's who. There are also custom icons that come with ODs. So I like to use those for like who is my like Slayer stack provider. I'll put a little icon on them. Or if there's someone that I'm doing a specific mechanic with, I put an icon on them just so I know where to go. And that works great in tail with high group necro. So you can still keep them visible, but like know who's who. And then off you go, thank you. These are more encounter specific add-ons like raid notifier, codes combat alerts, crutch alerts. They all give combat directionals during combat. And all of these, if you have them all installed, a lot of them have the same type of settings that will need to be turned off. So it does take a little bit of time to get them set up to your preference. And then Elms markers is very common in like that hard mode trifecta runs. We have some examples a little bit later of what this looks like, but they allow you or your raid lead to place specific markers on the ground, whether showing the group or showing the tanks where to stack things during during trash fights, or where to put certain things or where to stand during boss encounters and things like that. They're very helpful for positioning. And then there is Ratifactor, which is great for tracking the group vitality, your score, your achievements. It has an auto log function and a bunch of more things. It's really great. And then like there are trial specific add-ons. So Asylum Sanctorum Tracker has timers for the bosses, how to Cloud Rest, Rockgrove Helper, Dreadsail Reef Helper, Sandy Sedge Helper, Lucent Citadel Helper, How to Sunspire. They all have in them specific mechanic callouts or alerts that pop up within the add-on that are great. And then also player role icon and BSC's Hadakai. So all these here are great for like trial specific things that add-ons like raid notifier and codes might not have in them.
Yeah, and you'll see a lot of overlap here with specific mechanics, so it's really important. I know we have a disclaimer at the top, and Ren said something that you go through and turn off settings and find which ones you like. Um, Unfortunately, I don't think we had the time really or the ability to provide you with each setting, you know. But as you do trials and you download some of these add-ons, just make sure you're paying attention to what notifications you're getting and stuff like that, and see which ones you like and which ones you want to turn off, right? All right. And do you want me to jump in here, Ren?
Yes, this one's you.
This one's me? Okay. All right. So we have add-ons. This is called Hoder's Reflex. I think Ren mentioned it earlier. Um, this allows you to share your damage with your group. And so you can kind of see group damage, and it kind of looks like this box in the bottom right-hand corner here. And so it lets people see how much damage you're doing, and kind of lets your raid lead see how much damage you're doing, right? And this can be important for gauging how much damage you have in the group and what mechanics you're going to have to do and what strats you can use. And all around a good thing. As you get into more organized group raiding, this will definitely be a setting that you have to turn on. Um, we also have show other ultimates. So sometimes your raid lead wants to see your ultimates, not all the time, but you can share your ultimates, and it will look like this middle box here if you do. And so we can see when people are ulting and say, hey, I think I want you guys to ult on this next trash pack. And it looks like, Aloha, Skrail, and Clouds can ult there, and then we'll save Rem and Tristan for the next trash pack or something like that, right? And so you can kind of share your ultimate with your raid lead, which can also be important and is a more like group oriented thing that you see later on in your raiding career. You won't see that in like the pickup groups in Kraglen and stuff like that. And then your ultimate kind of looks like this. So this is Horn and Necro in the top right here, and your Colo. And so that's what it looks like for your raid lead when you are sharing like a Horn or a Colossus with them, right? And as a DPS, you might, if you're playing Necro, be sharing your Colossus. And so that's what it'll kind of look like. And then we have Wizard's Wardrobe. So I have a few videos after this slide by Mitch and Kozen who go over a few things with Wizard Wardrobe. This is a really important add-on to get at some point and kind of get set up. It lets you save your skills, food, CP, and gear to a specific setup that can allow you to just automatically load for you during fights or during trash. And then you can set up some keybinds like I have here in this photo. So I just select this page here, and then if I were to have multiple setups here, I can move through them by just clicking F1, F2, and F3. And that'll let me move, like if I was on my number 2 setup here that doesn't have anything equipped, I could press F1 and move back to my setup that has things equipped here, right? And so you can see how that could be really useful in raids with a lot of bosses and different trash encounters. You can kind of create, you know, uh, trash pack specific setups or boss specific setups, and then kind of move through them pretty freely using using equip, reloading, equip next setup, that type of stuff. You can also just make it automatically load for each boss if you want to with Wizard's Wardrobe, right? As soon as you step into the middle arena on Vast and you're fighting Olms, it will just automatically load the setup for you before you're in combat. So very useful add-on to save all your stuff. A lot of good players will have tons of setups, right, for different things that they're doing, and it's definitely a good way to get started, right? There's some other gear add-ons, I think like Alpha Gear and I forget the other one now. I don't like them as much. I've used them before. I definitely recommend using Wizard's Wardrobe. There's also some, as you'll see in the next few slides, some customization that you can do this to make it a little bit more involved, right? So, and we're not going to watch these videos right now, but they're here for your convenience to watch them later on. Mitch will talk about how to use Wizard's Wardrobe, how to set it up, which is something we're not going to do right now, obviously. And a lot of really good, a lot of really useful and good information in there for you guys. And then Kozen kind of talks about how to pre-buff. We don't talk about pre-buffing a ton, and we didn't really go over pre-buff setups in this DPS trainer. But it also shows you how to auto swap your potion using wizards and some stuff like that. So I think both the videos are very useful and something that you guys should have easily accessible to you. I have to skip through watching these. Okay, and then Ren, I think you're going to jump in here.
Sure. All right. This is an example of ELMS markers used in VAS. If you've ever done VAS, you're familiar with the lanes. So ELMS markers makes it great to see where your lanes are. As you can see, there's 1 through 8, all the DPS know where to stand. The yellow lines are not a part of ELMS markers. I just put those in just so you can kind of for more of a visual example, if that makes sense. So this is a good example of how beneficial ELMS is.
Yeah, if you're
And
kiting
then,
over people, if everybody's kiting
yeah,
over each other, yeah, this makes it really useful. Game changer in VAS.
nobody kites over each other in VAS. All right, next slide, please. All right, this is an example of player role icon. It works almost exactly like OD support icons. It has the markers for all the roles, but hidden within it are some benefits for Cloud Rest. So if you are doing like a +3, for example, and you have all 3 minis in and you have all the mechanics going off, this add-on puts an icon over the player's head that has that mechanic. So if they have Hoarfrost, they have the little ice thing. If they have Flare, they have a little fire over their head. If they have Voltaic Overload, they have the little lightning. It visually makes that fight go so much smoother, to see who's who and who has what. And then another great benefit of this, is when a player dies in Vet Cloud Rest, you can't revive them until their shade is killed. So this makes their tune like a different color if their shade is still alive.
And so I think I was jumping in here for this one. This is Q Cell's Dread Cell Reef Helper. It has a lot of really good things in it for Dread Cell Reef, but one of the settings we wanted to highlight was the Fire Frostbrand rune stack others should be off. And this is because, like, if you have this on, it will show you two indicators of where you need to stack on the Twins fight, the first boss fight, and DSR. You don't want to see both. You only want to see the one that's related to you. And so if you turn this off and then you turn Fire Frostband Runestack U on, it will only show you where you need to go, right? And it kind of mitigates some of those, where's my brand go? Am I going to blow people up, right? The panic that comes with when you get brand. And it's only for hard mode. All right, and then we have parsing add-ons. So we got combat metrics, and this allows you to see useful information like damage done during an encounter. We have fancy action bar plus. This could have gone earlier anywhere in here really, but it's important to have a like skill duration tracker, and we all really like fancy action bar plus. There's a few other ones out there that are pretty okay. Just have a preference for fancy action bar. I think it looks the cleanest. It performs the best. And you can put custom skills and stuff in there, like durations and stuff like that, based on some other things. So it works pretty well, I think, and it's definitely probably the best the add-on for this. Comet Metronome. So we were talking about parsing earlier, and Comet Metronome shows you your GCD timer, right? And so what that means is like when you cast a skill, you get a bar on your screen that basically counts down until you can cast another skill. And so this is really useful for knowing, to making sure you're casting all your skills in a minute, right? Or casting skills as fast as you can. But it also tells you when you need a light attack, right? So it'll be like, here's your skill duration, here's the area in which you should light attack, basically, right? And so when you get the add-on, it's not exactly, I think, completely intuitive right away, and we don't talk about it a ton here, but and there are a few other things like Comet Metronome out there, like a few other add-ons like this, but and they all operate pretty much the same, but they basically show you your GCD, right, and show you when you can light attack, and definitely something you should use as you're learning the game and like kind of learning how to weave. And then we throw these in here, and we think we talk about Crux Counter and XOY's Crux Tracker later. They just like track your Crux production, so you know so you don't overuse Crux. Or so you know how much Crux you have. I think it's pretty useful for Arcanists. And so this is CMX. This is something you might see from a parse, right? This is a parse that Ren did. There's a lot of information in this CMX. It's very hard to break it all down in this like specific trainer. But it tracks all your personal stats from an encounter. And it does the same thing in content, right? So you can see how you're doing on a boss, basically, with this add-on as well, how much damage you're doing. And so if you're not interested in knowing how your group's doing, you don't want to see like your group DPS or anything like that, like you don't want to use Hodors, but you still want to see your damage, you can use CMX for that. And based on the information here, you can kind of break down how the fight is going for you, right? So you can see like in the middle here where it says like stats, effective, and max in the green box in the middle. You see your max stamina, your weapon damage, your weapon critical, crit damage, and physical penetration, right? And so we talked about this earlier, but the crit damage cap is 125, right? You can't go above that. And so you want your crit damage to be about 125. And that's why like some classes that aren't Arcanist, Nightblade, or Templar have to run Fighting Finesse. And so you kind of put that on to make sure you're reaching that crit damage cap here. Now, that crit damage cap is reached with in-raid buffs like Major Force and stuff like Minor Force and other things like that you might get from a Velothi. If you don't have good horn up time or anything like that, you might see this number being a little bit lower, and you may need to adjust, right? If you're running in a pickup group in Cloud Rest and you don't have great major force uptime, you can slot fighting finesse and maybe gain a little bit more damage over something like exploiter or another CP. And that's kind of like you get to look at your CMX and kind of make those determinations based on the fight and where you're at. The same thing for penetration. Penetration is like I said earlier, the most important damage stat in the game. Basically, you want this to be maxed before you worry about a lot of the other stuff. And so if you have bad penetration, like major breach isn't being kept up, Alkosh isn't being kept up, you can slot things like force of nature to give yourself a little bit more penetration, and you'll probably gain some damage there. Um, so something to keep an eye on, right? As you're going through a trial, do you have these stats, right? And then on the right side it shows you your buffs, debuffs, that whole thing. You can see what abilities do the most damage. You can see how much you crit on those abilities, right? So Ren crit at 81% on her beam, pretty high. She's running Highland Sentinel, so that's pretty typical. But it kind of shows you how much you're critting, right? How much damage you're doing, your average max hit, stuff like that, right? So this is another thing you can kind of compare with other people and like, what's my average max hit versus other people's average max hit, or what are they averaging, right? Are they, and it kind of lets you know, are they beaming more than you? Are they whipping more than you? Are they doing another ability more than you? And that's why they're doing more on average with their ability, or is it a stat line thing? Was your stamina not low enough? And that is something CMS can show you, is like where your stamina is at. It's in a graph section that we don't mention here, but it can show you where your stamina was during the fight, and you can see if you hover around 33% if you're parsing. And then the other thing that I like that I do sometimes when I'm parsing is I take this page and I look at what Charles did. Do I have the same weapon damage as Charles, right? Do I have the same weapon critical as Rai? Do I have the same crit damage as Alduin? Do I have the same penetration as your favorite ESO parser, right? And that can tell you where you're missing damage and why you're not maybe doing as much damage as some of the parsers that you're watching, right? And that could be missing CP, gear, other things like that, right? And then we have the back page, is the info page. So when you submit a parse to a Discord like mine or like FTC, you submit the page that I just showed you and this page. And this kind of shows us what gear you're running. It shows you how many of each skill you cast. And then it shows you how you weaved, right? Which is another really important thing. So if you have a miss there, it means that you missed a light attack or a skill basically after you cast the skill, right? So it means you missed a light attack after a skill. And that can be really important for knowing like what skills you're not actually hitting your light attacks after, because some skills are channeled, and so you have to light attack a little bit later in their duration. Some skills interact a little weirdly, or they might be a little bit harder to light attack on, so you kind of have to figure out where the sweet spot is. Things like beam on Arcanist, beam on Templar, flail on Arcanist, and some other skills are channeled and they take a little bit longer. Pretty important. And I think and then we have CP as well. You should know what CP you're running, but this also shows us what CP you're running. So if you're having trouble doing damage and you aren't running the right CP or something like that, people can make suggestions. So there's more information in CMX. There's a lot of information in CMX. It's definitely a really good add-on to have. And it's really hard to break it all down right now. I will again plug the log review sessions that we do in Adra. You can bring a CMX and we can talk about why you might not be doing as much damage, right? Are you missing light attacks? Are you not casting your, spammable enough? Do you have downtime in your dots, right? So you can look at your fight duration, right? Which would be on your first page, and then see I cast fulminating 8 times, right? And does my 8 fulminating casts match up with the duration of the fight in which I'd want it to, right? And so there's a lot of information that you can kind of glean from this add-on. So a lot of good information here. And then Ren, do you jump in here on fancy action bar? Or do I?
I can. We've already kind of talked about it. This is just kind of showing a visual of what different types of, UI changes can make. And look how great Fancy Action Bar Plus looks with the big timers, how helpful it is. We love it.
We do. We do love it. And it kind of grays out the bar that you're not on. It highlights the bar that you are on. And there will be like an arrow on the side sometimes that shows you which bar you're on. And then you obviously, the reason that you use it is for these skill duration timers that you see on your screen there, right? So definitely really important to making sure you're uptiming your skills. All right. And then I think you jump in here definitely, right, for these?
Sure, yeah. There's something about Arcanists. So sorry for all the Arcanist haters out there. We love our Arcanists. These are 2 different types of crux trackers you can use. They both kind of do the same thing. The crux tracker is a little bit different. Then the crux counter, both of them display your active crux. Both of them play sounds for crux gained, lost, and then when you've reached max crux. The difference of crux tracker versus crux counter is crux tracker has it's called crux coach. It shows if you have overcast your flail. So if you'd flailed more than 3 times before you've hit your beam, and then it tracks your premature beaming. So let's just say did a 2 crux beam instead of 3. It lets you know that. And then there's just some visual examples of what the trackers look like. And then on the crux counter, I added a video of like what the sounds sound like.
So I
And
think
you can change all of that. Crux counter is a little bit more customizable. Oh, sorry, I'm yapping.
it's okay. I just want to make sure we could hear the sounds there for it.
Yeah, oh good. I appreciate it. So Crux counter is a little bit more customizable than Crux tracker, but it's kind of personal preference here. It's just very helpful to track your Crux for Arcanist so that you are getting the most out of your beam damage.
Looks
Next
gonna
one's
play again.
you.
Yeah. Okay. So we have some support DPS add-ons, and they're a little bit harder to set up sometimes. They kind of like require some like skill IDs and stuff like that occasionally. But you have BSCs or Untaunted for Alkosh. I like Untaunted. You put the skill ID in for Alkosh, and it shows you what you applied Alkosh to. Like if you put it on 2 targets, it'll show you both those targets and the duration of the Alkosh on those targets. Um, and BSCs can work for a few other like debuffs as well. Um, we have hyper tools. Uh, a lot of like end game raiders, as people like to call themselves, will use hyper tools to track things like off balance, pillagers, Naz, other buffs and debuffs to know what they have on them. So it's really useful. And I've hyperlinked in this a lot of very popular hyper tools so you have access to them. And we don't really go over how to use the add-on. It's a little bit more technical. It's actually not that technical, I don't think, but I didn't really go over it. If you have any questions about it or you want to set it up, you can just like shoot me a message or shoot Ren a message, or come to the log reviews or ask in any like DPS chat, and we can show you how to do it. But hyper tools is very useful. It lets you set up like custom trackers for it. Kind of like lets you kind of configure your own add-on in a way, I guess, for trackers that you might want, which is pretty like interesting, and it tracks some things that some other add-ons don't track. And then we alternate group frame, and I think we had a slide in here, but we took it out. But basically, what it does is it displays active buffs in group raid frame per player. So it'll show me when Ren has horn, like the horn buff on her, or when she has major force on her, and then it'll show me if she has like other buffs as well. Um, I think it's pretty useful. There are a few ways to track this. I use buff to group, but alternate group frame is definitely a good way to do this as well. And buff to group just has a bunch of like different buffs that you can have, and it tracks the individual player basically. So it'll put a screen of like 12 players on you. It'll put a little box of 12 players on your screen, and if they light up, it means they have the buff, and it'll show their duration of that buff on them. And then that's so you know when you need to reapply things, right? So if you're like minor courage on Arcanist, or you're applying like minor sorcery on a Sork, you can know when you need to reapply that buff. I think it's pretty useful. You can definitely use that as a support as well. It doesn't show debuffs though, so you can't use it for things like Elemental Catalyst or Alkosh. Um, but definitely like pretty interesting and a good add-on to have if you are doing some support stuff. All right, so I'm going to plug this. So and I'll talk a little bit more in depth about it. So every Thursday at about 7 p.m. we do some log review, and we do gameplay review. And you can come and you can do like it's like usually small group settings, like 1 to 3 players with me, Haley, Onyx, a few other officers and mods, and some other like end game players. We kind of set aside some time to talk with people who have some questions. And we do this in Adra, and it's open to anybody. You can ask any question. There are no dumb questions. We can do VOD review. We can do log review. We can do parse review. We can basically do, if you want to learn how to heal, we can do that. If you want to learn how to tank, we can do that. So a lot of options there. I will say that like getting a VOD of your gameplay is the single best way to get feedback and improve quick. I make all of my cores take VODs. I make, anybody who comes to these log reviews and they have a lot of questions. Um, Logs tell us a lot of stuff and probably, more stuff than you need almost, honestly. But seeing how you're casting and doing stuff in content is really helpful to like help you out, right? So taking a VOD, being able to take a VOD, very big. But yeah, come to the gameplay and log review, and spend some time with us, and we can go over some logs and some specific stuff with you, and hopefully help you improve. And so we're getting to the end here. We wanted to mention this. We're not going to go into detail about it. Mainly because if we spent some time on ESO logs and TFB, we could probably spend like hours going over these things. ESO logs, it records real-time combat for analysis. So you type / encounter log, turn that encounter log on, you download you download ESO log updater, like launcher thing that they have, and then you start the log in there, and you will be able to, it will produce a log for you at the end, or whenever you stop logging, essentially, and you can use that log to analyze your gameplay. If you're me, you always forget to log and hope that one of your raid members does it, but it's super useful, right? And if you are doing stuff and you want to learn how to get better, getting a log is really useful. And then TFB GG is a new tool. It's probably been around for a few months now, but it'll give you like averages of all your buffs and debuffs and stuff like that, and kind of like break down what type of damage you're doing. And so earlier I made a comment about like, how do you know which banner you should be running, right? Do you want to run the magic banner that buffs magic damage, the dot banner that buffs dot damage, the AoE banner that buffs AoE damage? And you can use TFB and look at a specific fight, and it will tell you what type of damage you're doing, like what type of damage your group is doing the most of. And you can, pick the banner based on that. Obviously, that's for more organized groups, probably a core group, but still very interesting. And then it will break down. It only does like fight specific stuff, so you have to like copy and paste a log into TFB, and will only do like a specific fight. It won't do the whole log. So if you want to see a different fight, you have to copy and paste a link from that fight in there. And so like here, I'd click on like Lion and Tolocel, and then copy the link from the web page that brought me to into TFB. If I wanted to see a Sail Ripper, I'd have to click on it and copy that link and post it in the TFB. But it'll break down all your buffs, debuffs, and everything else there. And there's also a penetration calculator and a crit damage calculator in TFB as well. There's a lot of useful tools there. So two really cool tools to have at your disposal to use to help you get better at the game. All right. And so we wanted to say thank you. We wanted to shout a few people out who helped us out during this. Obviously, Haley, always a great help. Immediacy provided us with a PowerPoint of some stuff he did a long time ago. We used a lot of the content from there, so he helped a ton. Shaggy, Rage, Bat, and Sheer, all with some feedback. We really appreciate it, guys. Thank you for helping us set this up. And yeah, thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. That's everything we have today. All right.
That was so cute. The little
What
clap
was the little
sound
clapping?
Yeah. I guess if you have any questions, you guys are free to ask them now. If you don't, you're free to go.
Yeah, I super appreciate this. Thank you guys for setting this up.
No problem. Hopefully it was useful, and I will cut this video up, post the VOD, and post the link to the presentation. And so this will be like available for you guys at any time to use.
I think you did have one question earlier, Chris, in the chat of like the Discord chat. MD Jessup asked how people are choosing between Rune Carver and Deadly when they're on Arcanist in Fight to Fight.
So theoretically, these sets are pretty equal in damage output, and you can use either one and probably do comparable damage. I like Rune Carver in certain fights where there's multiple targets, but not 3 targets. So something on like Oaks. There are a lot of people who will argue that, and they're probably correct, that Deadly does more damage, but Rune Carver gets its value from always doing damage, basically. So when you're like, you have caltrops down and you're not beaming on Arcanist, it will still be doing damage for you. So if you're on your back bar and other things like that, I guess not on your back bar if you have Rune Carver front bar, but if you're on your front bar and you're not casting beam or another damage over time ability like that, it'll just always constantly be doing damage, right? And so I think it's better. I like it more. You can also use it in a fight like Ysalia and VSE, where you have like a Wamasu and the boss. You know, if you have to drop your beam for some reason, Deadly Strikes is no longer buffing your beam, and you don't have any channel abilities going. So basically, the value of that set is 0. Rune Cover will still be giving you some damage, and it procs burning. And burning is a good status effect to have down. It does a decent amount of damage. And then if it procs burning for you, you can run a different weapon enchant. So you'd run, instead of burning, you could run like poisoned and absorb stamina, which will proc something called Sundered, which gives you a flat 100 weapon and spell damage when it's procced. You know, either or probably. If you're beaming correctly, not wasting crux, spending as much time as you can beaming, you probably get a little bit more value out of Deadly, but comparable. I don't know. A lot of the people who are doing a lot of damage right now are using Rune Carver, honestly, on some of those like 2-target fights. So that's what I'd probably use. But you know, I guess from a numbers perspective, there shouldn't be a lot of difference. All right. And are there any other questions? All right. Well, if there's not any other questions, thank you guys very much. I appreciate everybody coming. And if you want this information, I guess look for the VOD and the link to the spreadsheet or the slideshow.
Wait, sorry, you had one more follow up on the Rune Carver question. I don't know if you have the chat open for this.
I don't. Oh, is it in this? Is it in the actual?
Yeah, it's in the actual like
Okay.
voice chat channel. The question for everybody else, so that you guys can hear if you're tabbed out, was to say I got wall casted on something. If I'm on front bar, it will still be ticking versus deadly, where it's doing nothing while I'm not beaming.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
typing in both. You don't know who's looking at what. That's fair.
Okay. Yeah. So that's what you said is true, right? So if you have your wall down and you're on your front bar and you're not beaming because you're casting trap, cloak, or something else, it will still be doing damage and proccing for you, right? The value of deadly during those times is, you know, because you're not using a channel ability, is 0, right? Deadly Strike is also pretty strong in Templar, I guess, but you know, I don't know, it's not really what you're asking, but yeah. So I like Rune Carver a lot. Obviously, if you have 3 or more targets like Reef or Bosse, you're not going to use Rune Carver. You're going to use Azure. But in those 2-target fights, Rune Carver is pretty strong. I think in the single target fights, that might be where Deadly Strikes might pull ahead. I'm not entirely sure. But Deadly Coral or Deadly Rune Carver in a single boss fight is probably almost personal preference. What do non-arcs use with Highland to parse? That could depend on the class. Nightblades will probably use like Null Arca. Although next patch, that's not true. DKs probably use Rally. Rally's like the strongest single target set in the game, so you can use that. Some classes will use Coral to parse. So I think that might be like Sorks. I don't know if Templars use Coral anymore. They used to. But Coral's definitely another strong parse set. I'm trying to think of what else you'd use. Some of the sets we mentioned basically is what you'd be using. Obviously, like you need a Slayer set to pair with Highland, right? So Slayer, I guess a Minor Slayer set. So Minor Slayer comes from trial sets, so you have to basically pair it with a trial set. And Minor Slayer gives you a 5% damage done basically across the board to like trial monsters and dungeon monsters. So those are things like, that's like Reli, Null Arca, World of Depths. I'm trying to think of what else maybe I'm missing. That might be all of them, honestly, for the most part that you're using. On combat metrics, what is effective versus max pen? So the max is what you reach during the fight, right? Like what is your maximum possible like value that you reach during the fight? A lot of times you'll see that value being higher than 18,200. That's just because you have all of the like penetration debuffs available. And then some classes have penetration like passives built into them. Like Arcanist has a pen passive based on how many, I forget what it's like, Herald of the Tomb skills you have slotted on your front bar, or whatever bar you're on. I guess it doesn't have to be your front bar. So they'll give you extra pen. So if you're on Arcanist and you're looking at your pen calculator, you know, you might see 2,300, right? Because you have 2 or 3 penetration skills on your front bar. And in those scenarios, as long as you're reaching max effective pen, you might be able to drop your one light. That just really depends on the penetration you have during the fight. I don't recommend dropping the one light. I think it's really useful. You're kind of assuming perfect uptimes when you're parsing on a trial dummy versus in content. You might not have perfect uptimes, so that one light probably gets a little more value there. Effective pen, yeah, effective pen is just what your I guess the pen that like you are experiencing on average throughout the fight. And that's why like your max pen might be higher, right? So if you look at a fight and you have like 17,000 effective pen, but your max pen is 2,300, you can actually hover over that and see the percentages at which you were hovering at certain penetration markers. Not as useful, but it kind of gives you a breakdown of where you're at, like where you're sitting at, and why your effective pen might be 17.9 instead of 18.20, right? It might be because you're, usually at 23,000, but for 30% of the fight, you were missing Alkosh or something like that. Yeah, so you just want to kind of make sure your effective pen's as close to possible to 18,200.
I'll add one step on further to that, Chris, too. In fights where you have multiple targets, CMX, like when you open your combat window, your broad combat window, in the bottom left-hand corner where it's got all of the names of the different targets of the fight, like there's going to be things in there that aren't as important. So they're not where like most of the buffs and or debuffs are being focused. So if you've got like I'll give an example in Oaks, since we're using that, like the hoppers, the little frogs or whatever that spawn are obviously not the priority target or ad, right? But you might want to know for the first mini or the second mini, depending on how much push you want on it, and then obviously Oaks himself, like what your pen looks like in relation to those bosses. If you click on the name of an enemy in your CMX, it will like recalculate your max pen, your effective pen, and then ditto with like your crit and everything else to be specific to that target. So it will show you a view of like what all of that looks like on a target basis, which sometimes can be more helpful if you're like, man, I'm not really sure why that specific thing is dying really slowly. It could just be that like that target specifically is missing Alkosh or something else critical to help it die faster.
I guess it can. And to Taylor's point, that's a great point. You can see penetration like on a target, right? And that can be super useful on fights like Bosse or Reef Guarding, where there's a lot of targets, or even like Gasalia. You can look at the penetration on the ads, like the A-bombs, the Wamasus, and the Reef Guardians to see like maybe Major Breach is being applied to one Reef Guardian, but not to the other.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, some of the stuff can inflate your max number if you don't look at the target itself, right? So like when you're looking at your parse, you kind of want to focus on the boss or the ad that you want to look at to see how your values are versus that, right?
Oh, don't do it, Oliver.
Yeah, I mean, Explorer is still always probably going to be the best in that scenario. You're still getting that 10% damage buff no matter what, and chances are it's eventually going to line up for you that you're beaming and doing stuff like during the Exploiter like window, So overall, if you have good off balance uptime, Exploiter is probably the best CP to slot. And so I guess there's a lot of we're getting questions in chat right now. Maybe people can't see these, but the question was: is Exploiter always the best, even if you suck at off balance timing, or is it just having it when off balance is available at all enough to make it better than the other one? And yeah, it's basically just having it at all, right? So. So yeah, after pen, crit damage and weapon and spell damage and max stats, like max stats is probably the one you want to worry about the least. That can depend on what sets you're wearing and what food you're wearing and stuff like that, which will change a little bit. I think probably it's probably pen, then crit damage, then crit chance, and then weapon and spell damage. Actually, maybe weapon and spell damage before crit chance. Those are both pretty strong. But I'd probably say it's like probably pen, crit damage, weapon, spell damage, crit chance, max stats. And penetration is the most important. The rest of them have a little bit less priority. So ideally, weapon and spell damage doesn't really come. I guess it does come from CP, but the majority of weapon and spell damage comes from other sources. And so you should ideally be getting as like the weapon to spell damage that you need from like your gear and enchants and other things.
Pookie. Sorry, that was the
Um,
dog.
And then the crit chance also comes from gear for the most part, and the weapons that you're wearing. You don't see a lot of variation in crit chance unless you're wearing Highland Sentinel. Basically, everybody has like the same base crit chance as long as you have the correct buffs. You have major, minor prophecy, that type of stuff. So you don't really need a prio crit chance, I guess. As far as it goes for damage, like I said, you see some diminishing returns at some point on crit chance, which is why you don't see us going like trying to find all the possible ways for us to get crit chance that are possible, right? Like after you start, you get to 67%. There's definitely like some diminishing return. Like you're obviously the majority of your skills at that point are critting. Making sure you're at crit damage cap and other things is more important. Does that kind of answer your question? Cool. Yeah. And then Kiz made a point to something I said earlier when we were talking about gear. If you're running a set that gives you penetration, that has a penetration line, you can likely drop your one light piece and run medium. That was part of the caveats that I mentioned earlier that I wasn't really going to go in a ton about. But if you run like Rune Carver or Kiz mentions Ansel, you can drop your one light usually because you'll have enough penetration. On some classes that don't have built-in pen, you might still need to keep it. So you still have to kind of pay attention to your max pen, effective pen, that kind of area, right? But something to think about, I guess. And also, I guess maybe adds a little bit of value to those sets in situations where you might not be reaching pen cap. All right. Are there any more questions? I know we've had a bunch. We definitely have some time for a few more. I have to run to a core after this. So, okay. I think that's everything. If you have any questions, feel free to DM me, DM Ren, throw them somewhere in Adra or for FTC, and we can definitely answer them for you. But yeah, I hope this was useful, guys. Thank you for coming.
Mm-hmm. And to Chris's point earlier too, Kinetic's point earlier too, signups will be open soon for the log VOD. And honestly, we're probably just gonna rebrand to like something to the degree of like general Raider development office hours that are typically on Thursdays at 7 Eastern in Adra. You are welcome, even if you like don't necessarily feel like you've got something to share yet, to spectate and attend, as long as obviously you're respectful of the people who are receiving direct feedback. But they're really great ways to like, if you want help on something specific to your gameplay, whether that's your build, your parse, a log you have of you in trial, a video you took of you in a trial, or a video you took of a parse, really anything. To I think Chris mentioned, like if you have a CMX that you want to walk over or share, our staff are kind of more than happy to provide some of that help. And that's on a weekly basis at 7. The signups for next week will probably go up sometime later today. If you see that there are few spots available, we will always look to add additional reviewers based on like the number of signups that we get week to week. So it's kind of it's like a, we might start with 2 or 3 people on the list and then expand or let some people have the day off based on sort of demand week to week. So you're more than welcome to X up and we will find somebody to sit with you if you're interested.
All right. Well, thank you guys. All right, I'm going to end this